question from the audience.
Yes, Martin Izamidis from the European Commission representation here. I have a question to Dr. Aruanetis about the models and the assumptions that have gone into them. If I got you correctly, the model projects that in the next 50 years in Latvia, the trips that people will be taking by cars would be increasing fivefold, and in Lithuania, it was mostly the car modality that was on the increase. I'm assuming that you're not projecting the Rail Baltica there in yet. You know, this is based on no Rail Baltica. And in Lithuania, it was three times more than currently. With a projected population decrease, the depopulation and sort of the trends, I'm just wondering, you know, where is this optimism of 5 times increase is coming from? I mean, is this projecting a massive influx of population from somewhere, or is this some sort of, you know, what are the assumptions that are going into this, what seems to me rather optimistic prognosis about the increase of transportation?
I think that, okay. To deal with any forecast is the interpretation. How do you read it? And that's what you're asking about. When you look at our forecasts, this total travel demand relates to the demand. People will need to move that much. That level of movement will happen within that country and across the borders of that country. And when you say 5 times as much, that really means 5 times as much. And having the current structure, the pattern of infrastructure as it is today, now, the connectivity levels as they are today, and as they have developed historically, basically historically means no additional rail infrastructure and so on, you have this outcome. It doesn't mean that you can't change it. A radical change in the structure of infrastructure, you can't model it because it's a decision. Rail Baltic is a decision. And that is something that you can't model on such level. If you can model whether that is a good decision or not, but you can't model whether that decision will happen. And that's where it comes from. That split is indicative of the current policies. They don't take into account that there will be a new rail line. They don't take into account that there will be a new ferry terminal for passengers or something else. It's that's where it comes from.
Arni, you want to comment on this as well?
No, I think there is. I would imagine his models, our models, were also similar, where you had to take into consideration the rail for the future demands specific to our case. I don't think that they were modeling it that way necessarily for overall kind of passenger demand. But it is a point that needs to be very carefully considered because the population is decreasing in this region. And I can't say, based on our experiences in the globe, that putting infrastructure into a country will actually change that shift. It may help, but it's not the catalyst that changes that shift. So, but I think when we were pursuing our feasibility studies, we were trying to be as conservative as possible in the numbers, and I believe in my discussions with Nautis and E&Y also weren't overly optimistic in their projections as well, because that would be a downfall for the project to be overly optimistic.
Right. Other questions from the audience? Okay, I would have a question to Emils. One of the qualitative case studies presented as part of the CBA was that clearly there will be better opportunities for commuting for education, knowing that there are several higher education institutions along the Rail Baltica line. So what do you make of these trends?
Yeah, so as we heard, there are more than 600 universities along the Rail Baltica route. But I'm afraid that not all of them are really world class. Yeah? So even the best of the Baltic universities, which is Tartu, they make something like 500 top universities. So there's still work to upgrade for universities to sort of climb up the rankings and to tighten their research and teaching and really to kind of go up the value chain. But I would say this is our chance that in the next 15, 20 years, we have to converge this infrastructure development with the development of soft infrastructure of knowledge economy so that we can, I mean, you can argue that in 15 years there will be a Rail Baltica, but that's not an argument to invest or to move to a country. So, but if these processes are sort of going in parallel and you see some kind of development, some kind of reason to come to the Baltics to study, to teach, to innovate, then when the tracks come there, then finally it will connect and all make sense.
And Raimond, so you're a very experienced commuter, a rail commuter. What do you make of these trends? Not only perhaps in terms of education, but also maybe in terms of consumption patterns.
I take high-speed train more than 100 times a year. Really, not a joke. And what it gives to me, it gives me this opportunity to work at a job which I wouldn't be available to me if it was a 4 or 5 hour drive one way. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't choose to do it. So this allows me to bring higher value to the economy in the end. And if you think about 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people like me in a city who commute somewhere else and bring that added value back home, it's a lot of families fed.
And Arni, during the original CBA, how was this kind of shrinking distances, commuting reflected?
Well, it was by all means taken into consideration because all of those regional cohesion metrics add value in the soft side benefits that went into the cost-benefit analysis, looking at all of the different things that will affect the socioeconomic changes that take place. So we weren't as specific at that time looking into specific sectors or industries that will gain some type of added value. We were looking as the economy as a whole. So, but I think right now is the point to look at each of those independent sectors to find what are the value propositions for, let's say, education or industry or technology, because they will all benefit in some form or fashion.
Let's take a question from Slido. It's a question from Mr. J. Essentially deals with the elasticities of transport demand. In other words, how much attractiveness would certain route elements lose if you, for example, gain an additional hour because of a higher speed travel? How valuable is that gained speed, and how do you perhaps segment the customers who will actually value that and because of that would modally shift?
Yeah. Well, when we were doing the feasibility study, of course, we were doing all kinds of sensitivity tests on every one of the calculations for demand, and this was definitely one of them. We looked, for the passengers specifically, we looked at time, and adding or subtracting hours, like are mentioned here, did affect the element because it changes the modal shift. Especially if you think about, if we use that exact comparison, Riga-Tallinn, that of course is, that travel time is center to center, but a person typically lives somewhere outside the center, so you have to take that into consideration. If they have 20 minutes of travel time to the center to get on the train, and then a 2-hour commute, and then another 20 minutes at the other end, then that trip is valuable. If you add it to 3, then you're getting close to what you would minimize with a car. So the speeds had to be maximized to the greatest extent possible so that they're shorter in duration, but not as short where it overcomes the air trip. Because the air trip will still be the shortest by all means, but we know that the air trip also has the security at both ends and still the commuter time at both ends. So when we looked at each of those segments, we felt that this travel time that we had achieved, which is roughly the 2 hours Tallinn-Riga, 1.5 hours Riga-Kaunas, met the biggest amount of agglomeration of trips. So the demand was highest at those time intervals. So I would, to answer that question, adding an extra hour to a 2-hour trip will decrease the passenger ridership on the train, for sure.
Is that consistent with your modeling results?
Well, we don't model on that level, but that is reasonable because of the value of time.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of urbanization, how does that look?
Well, now it's 4 hours, even more by bus. So that's clearly a losing proposition. And if you make it a 3-hour ride by medium speed train, I think it's kind of not enough time saving and not enough quality time gained. So yes, 2 hours between Riga and Tallinn, that makes sense.
And it also needs to be overlaid with the fare, the cost of the ride. Still, airfare will be significantly higher in cost than the rail, which is higher in cost than the coach or the car. So both values on top of one another really gave us the like you said, the sweet spot on the timing. So.
All right, thanks. Okay, here's Raimond, one for you, but colleagues, please interject as well. From OECD research, how does it look? What would be the preferences of future travelers in terms of transportation mode? I mean, you touched upon these subjects in your presentation and other presentations as well. Clearly, it's probably not one mode, but a mix of modes in a seamless supply chain. But how does it look from your research?
Well, we haven't done specific research on this, but from transport economics. The traveler is a rational being, well, unless he is Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, who just likes trains and therefore he takes it. But a rational traveler will compute cost of time plus ticket cost plus connection getting to the train, and he will do all the computation in the back of his head, not on the paper, but just he will compute and he will do the choice. And the rail line, Rail Baltica, has to do the best proposition. And if it does the best proposition, then it will be the mode of choice.
Emil?
Well, I mean, I can speak from sort of passenger experience side. That, of course, there's the trend to de-automobilization, so the car is sort of on the way out, and the high-speed train still sounds like a good proposition for the passengers. So, of course, we can only speculate what these future passengers will prefer. Maybe they swing back to kind of solar-powered self-driving cars or whatever, but this is our best guess that if they be like us, they will prefer to take the train and the bicycle or walk to their destination or whatever.
Arne, what about you?
Well, I think as I mentioned in my talk, shared modes of transportation and multimodal types of transportation will be preferred in the future. And I think with the increase of the cost of fossil fuels will lead to a very strong preference of electrified infrastructure, which rail is, because some of the other alternate energy sources still aren't providing a fast enough mode of transportation. And as we saw, everything is about speed. It's going to continue to be about speed. And the fastest, most environmentally sensitive mode of transportation is still electrified rail, and will be, I think, for the time to come.
Roland USO is very keen to verify the results of your computer simulations, but taking this in a wider context, are these Excel modeling algorithms ever available in studies like these? Or are they usually intellectual property of the contractor without the possibility of a public recalculation or verification? Agnes and Raimond, probably.
In general, the model itself is kind of intellectual property, but all of the assumptions, all of the calculations were very transparent in the work that we did, and it gets explained in detail. So, and those documents are all public records. So if anyone wanted to look at the source data and the algorithms or the assumptions based in the algorithms, they are available.
Well, we don't publish the actual programming bits of our work because, well, that's our competitive advantage in a way. But the data that we use and the methodology is published in. Our colleagues. They publish academic papers on the methodology and on the approaches that we are using, and so that is available and mostly being published, apart from the actual, let's say, details of it, which are proprietary and we don't publish. So you can. If you follow the proper methodology and you use the same assumptions, you will get almost the same results.
What was validated actually in multiple times during the process between the two CBAs, we actually had a process, a very open and synergistic process between the two consultancy companies to review our data and our findings with their data and their findings. And I think that's been an excellent process for this project to have that collaboration amongst the various consultants, because it did show that E&Y was coming up roughly with the same results that AECOM was. And that's the validation that can take place, and that validation has to be talked about in the public realm so that we defer these kind of questions of data integrity, data correctness, accuracy, etc.
And I think just to add, of course, also in this recent experience, beyond the relationship between the contractor and the client, there's usually also external review to further validate from an independent party on the integrity of the results and conclusions. Any more questions from the audience? Please, sir.
Thank you. In a first study about Rail Baltic that made by consultant Covey, they made passenger modeling that include population all over the country, not only the capitals, but also other cities of the all Baltic states. And they measured how a new project will affect the mobility and access to the main cities of different towns in the countries. Is your new modeling also involved all different towns and all different people living in a different places in a country, how this new route will change their mobility and access?
From a 2010 perspective, when we did that after the initial COE study, by all means we took into consideration all of the other regional rail, which connects most of the secondary cities and tertiary cities in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So in essence, you're capturing the entire passenger demand that will be magnetized toward the line. And of course, we were looking at full population, GDP statistics and growth statistics, not only the capital cities. The capital cities become the hub, of course, of the commuter that technically is using the service the most, but all of the other secondary and tertiary cities were considered.
Anything to add?
We don't model on that micro level. or modeling is sort of on a different level. Notwithstanding the approach itself, if we had enough resource to go into this macroeconomic data for, let's say, if you could split Latvia in 26 regions and Estonia and something and Lithuania, and if you had all the data for all of that, then the same model which is developed could handle and go through the data, and you would get more regional forecasts, and you could actually forecast more detail on the existing network. We just lack a little bit of data, which is a lot of work to compile.
Okay, the first answer was not really answering my initial idea, because if you sum up all the population on the country and assume that they all travel through the capital, that's not really the case if we talk about population in Estonia and Latvia, because there is second biggest town of Estonia is Tartu, that is located quite close to the Latvian border, much closer than capital, and there is also certain populated towns that is across the existing railway network from Valka to Riga, and it's quite a wrong assumption to believe that the passenger from Tartu will commute first to Tallinn and then to Riga and then go to Valmiera. It would be probably a little bit not realistic assumption. And there is also many other populated towns like Narva and Rakvere that is right now close to the existing railway network, and their connection time to Riga would be much better using existing railway network compared to the new Rail Baltica route. So taking these considerations would alter the benefits of the new commuting line, because there is lack of passengers and lack of finances to put efforts to have the two parallel routes for passenger travel, both populated and working. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the main questions when I asked.
Thank you for the question. Madam Rubis.
Clearly, none of these gentlemen can answer that question for the current CBA. Let's start with that. Secondly, Ernst & Young is currently not in the room, so we cannot ask one of the gentlemen to respond in great detail to what you're saying. But let me take a high level at it. Clearly, there has been a review of these same traffic patterns, as both Arnes and Raimunds have explained, that make a lot of sense. In each of the countries, there are different other cities that may or may not connect to the main points. Rail Baltica's current mandate is to, first of all, build the international line, which is Tallinn, Riga, Panevėžys, Kaunas, Białystok, Warsaw, including Kaunas, Vilnius. So what we're really looking at is what will affect that part of the route. As you should know, in Estonia, there was an evaluation of whether or not the high-speed train should go through Tartu or not. It was even, in one of the estimates that Arnes has, to be very blunt and very direct, it would have meant a significantly more expensive line to build in Estonia at the time. And the Tallinn-Pärnu line as such was deemed to be more economic and more efficient at the time. This is way before I came on board, but that is a little bit implied in your question. Now, in the end, I think many of us that have been involved in projects that develop over decades, and this one develops over decades, none of us can predict how consumers behave. Some of you may know that I used to be part of Statoil in the Baltic states. And 15, almost 20 years ago, everybody said bye-bye in the Baltic. No self-respecting person in a car will ever drink a cup of coffee from a paper cup. Need I say more? What we don't know today, and a lot of us are actually extrapolating and doing the best forecast possible that we can for any patterns, because this line doesn't exist. We don't know how people will truly behave. I am making any guesses that Estonia will decide to have better connections, possibly, between Narva and Tallinn. To the best of my knowledge, they're already making some investment decisions about the road between Tartu and Tallinn, for example, or road improvements between Tartu and Tallinn. Almost all projects that we have looked at or that we have had access to, especially for passengers, have shown that the estimates were always extremely conservative related to passenger behavior once the line is actually built. So long story short, I would have to ask nowadays once more the Ernst & Young people exactly what they analyzed per the different routes from the different cities. But in general, what we're looking at is the international line. Where there is opportunity, I think in all three countries, quite separately, and I would think that some of the thinking may be happening in Poland as well. And Jakob actually very well showed on the map what the thinking is around Poland. There will be opportunity to connect to these different stations from the other cities, because the greatest, not one of the greatest, but one of the risks is of course just to have the north-south line, as Emil said, but we need to keep the countries coherent, whether it's Liepāja or Daugavpils to Riga or Klaipėda to Kaunas and Vilnius, Panevėžys, we've got along the line there. So it's not the simple answer, but I trust that we are making the most pragmatic investment in the lines based on the decisions that each country has made. An analysis has been made along the lines where each country wishes to build the line. And I have no doubt that once it's built, the passengers will be there in spite of a potentially stopped demographic downturn.
Thank you, Barbara. We also have Janis Strautmanis, who was part of the Ernst & Young CBA team. He could also add a few comments.
Hello, yes, Janis Strautman is part of the CBA development team. Just a small technical remark regarding the question. So the model was constructed taking into account broad range of origin-destination pairs, meaning the key population hubs in the Baltics, Tallinn, Riga, Kaunas, Warsaw, and others, which were considered core of the model. Of course, we also knew from the state level mobility statistics, the mobility patterns of other inhabitants of the Estonia, the mentioned towns of Rakvere, Narva, or Tartu. However, they went into the model with very, very little probability of them ever choosing Rail Baltica. That would happen in very extreme and rare cases. And the combined effect of such passengers, to my knowledge, does not exceed 50,000 per year. So in the terms of overall 5 million numbers, this is not a significant influence of the project results and viability. Thank you.
Thank you, Janis. And to conclude, we know that the long-term viability and success of Rail Baltica is very much contingent upon availability of multimodal passenger infrastructure. So I wanted to ask for all the panelists, what would you see as the critical features for those city and airport terminals to maximize kind of the future use patterns of the future travelers?
I would probably consider them or characterize those stations or terminals to be thought of to be extremely flexible and future thinking when it comes to technologies. Because in all of these modes, the technology is what changes the passenger experience. The rail and the rolling stock will be relatively the same, but what will change are the systems, the processes, and how people embark, disembark, change when it comes to security, all of these elements. So that needs to be put into those stations to raise the passenger demand.
Raimond?
The thing that we take into account when we do the modeling, and that is one of the parameters there, is the accessibility. How many people can easily access that intermodal hub or that railway station? So you have to work on the accessibility to that railway station. And that is reduce the minutes that it takes to get there, reduce the cost that it takes to get there, integrate the service, integrate the ticket, so that it all comes together seamlessly, so that you know that you will make it, that you can rely, that there's a sort of guaranteed connection, and what happens if you miss it. So those are the things. It's more practical.
And finally, Emil?
Yeah, I would say that the city is now the arena where we need to work. That's the kind of scale that we have to pay attention to, because now we have the plan for the rail infrastructure. That's clear, it will happen, there will be stations, but now the question is, how do we integrate this large rail infrastructure into the city fabric? So to add to this smoothness and seamlessness of connection in terms of kind of physical accessibility and in terms of transport schedules and connectivity with the city, I would say that the station itself is a destination. It's not just a transit point, it can be the place where you go to have a meeting, or there's a hotel or restaurant. It's part of the city. So let's think in these terms. Let's think of the best examples, like, Berlin Hauptbahnhof, which is already the city. You are already arrived.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, that concludes the session. Applause to the panelists and also to the audience.
Thank you.